I think that there are two ways to talk about executive function. When we talk about it in the neurodivergent community, when we say things like, oh, I'm having a really bad executive function day, or my executive dysfunction is really acting up, when we say those kinds of things, usually what we're talking about is a very discrete set of skills that we're not very good at. So things like remembering where we put our keys, or getting things on our calendar accurately and then remembering to show up for appointments, being really messy and disorganized in our lives, and keeping our houses tidy. Those are the set of discrete skills that we talk about as executive functioning. The theorists of executive function, and I'm talking specifically about Russell Barkley, whose work I have read most extensively on executive function. They often refer to executive function as a set of higher order thinking skills. And specifically, what they mean is the ability to set a goal, a very specific and concrete goal, sometime in the future. And usually that goal is about being independent and self-sufficient and functioning well in a capitalist society. So in this formulation, executive function is the ability to set such a goal and then to move toward it in a single-minded, focused, undistracted, and ultimately successful way. So to get as quickly from A to B, B being independence, self-sufficiency, productivity, etc., etc. That's what people like Russell Barkley mean when they say that executive function is higher order thinking. All right, so this notion that executive function is a higher order thinking that neurodivergent people sort of lack or that we're bad at is something that I am very critical of and that I want to debunk. I believe that no matter how you're thinking about executive function or how you define it, whether it's that set of skills or whether it's this notion that executive function is a higher order thinking, either way, we're talking about, in both situations, there's values judgments involved. So, for example, if we're talking about things like the ability to prioritize, the ability to stay focused, the ability to not be impulsive, there's very much values attached to those. So for example, when we say that like a kid in a classroom isn't able to prioritize, what we usually mean is that they're not willing to do what the teacher says when the teacher says it. And that may or may not be a skill that that kid needs to survive in the world, but it seems to me unquestionably a skill that involves a value judgment, right? Like when you say you should prioritize X over Y, what we're saying is that X is more valuable than Y. And many neurodivergent people have no trouble at all prioritizing. We just prioritize the quote unquote wrong things, right? So there's value judgments involved in that discrete set of skills, for sure. But also even in this notion that executive functioning is higher order thinking. I mean, that in and of itself is very much a value judgment. So getting back to that kid in the classroom, right? So like there's a kid in the classroom who's playing Legos and building something really cool, right? And learning all kinds of cool things about mechanics and construction and design while they're doing that. And the teacher comes over and says, hey, it's time to put your Legos away. And now we're going to go sit quietly at our seats and do this math worksheet. And the kid says, I don't want to. And the teacher says, you have to. And the kid says, why? And the teacher says, because I said so. And when the kid causes a disruption because they don't want to move from their Legos to the math worksheet, we call that executive dysfunction, right? This kid is not developmentally advanced enough in their ability and their higher order thinking skills to know that they need to move from the Legos to the seat work. Whereas from my perspective, quite honestly, that kid is doing critical theory, like in real time. That kid is doing a critical theory takedown of the entire educational industrial complex, in my mind. So it sort of depends on what your values are, right? How you see this as higher order thinking. I just think the notion that executive function is higher order thinking, or at least the only sort of higher order thinking that is possible or that matters, is just complete bunk. And in the previous live stream that I did, I offered a whole other set of skills and values, design thinking, which I think are a set of skills and values that are much more meaningful and in keeping with the natural talents that neurodivergent people often have. And if we lived in a world where those were the sets of skills and the values that our society overall embraced, then we wouldn't really have much of a problem, right? We wouldn't be considered developmentally delayed. But that's not the world that we live in. So anyway, I hope that I have debunked this notion that executive function is the only sort of higher order thinking that is possible or that exists in the world, and that we as neurodivergent people are just lacking it or somehow delayed in our development of it.